The Atlanta Interactive Marketing Association is proud to present the first episode of a three-part on-demand webinar series, Marketing and Music. In this first episode, host Joe Beliotti of the Music Division is joined by Kathy Appelfeld-Olson, a music and media journalist. Together, they'll explore the live streaming boom we're currently experiencing. For those of you who aren't familiar with AIMA, we're a digital marketing association that aims to create high-value and inclusive experiences. At the end of the day, our goal is to elevate our members and their companies. None of that, including this amazing webinar series, would be possible without our amazing sponsors, so a big thank you to them. With everything currently going on, AIMA is committed to increasing its digital presence and has some really exciting upcoming events. Mark your calendars for a follow-up to this episode, a Q&A with our speakers where they'll answer any questions you may have. We'll also be recording episode 2 and 3 of this series, all about how brands are integrating music and marketing, so look out for that content soon. Aside from digital content and resources, members join for access and exposure. Access to content like this, and exposure to colleagues, peers, and leaders in the Atlanta marketing community and beyond. If you're interested in joining or have any questions, we'd love to hear from you at membership@atlantaima.org. Without further ado, we're proud to introduce our host, Joe Beliotti, former head of global music for Coca-Cola and current co-founder of the Music Division. He's joined by Kathy Appelfeld-Olson of Synopsis Media. Take it away, Joe.
Cool. Thank you, Danny. Really appreciate it. Thank you for having us here. My name is Joe Beliotti. I'm with the Music Division. We're a company here in Atlanta that helps brands connect with music as part of their marketing. I'm joined today by Kathy Appelfeld-Olson, who's a music and media journalist. Kathy will be my sort of co-pilot through this, and we're going to have a great conversation at the end. And we're going to talk about today how live music and streaming are coming together to create new opportunities for brands. But before we get into the actual where we are today, I think we need to back up a few weeks because at the start of 2020, the projections for live music were absolutely positive. They were groundbreaking. They were record-breaking as far as the projections for 2020 being a year of growth, attendance, revenue. The number of brand sponsors were increasing, and brands use live events quite frequently. If they have a really meaningful role in the music experience, they can usually attract a really good amount of attention through being at live concert tours or music festivals. Well, those projections unraveled pretty quickly. In January, we started to see the coronavirus in Asia cancel live music events. Rolling into February, we started to see Europe get the cancellations, and then into March, we started to see an increase in US cancellations. I think the first major one was March 4th when Ultra Music canceled, then March 6th when South by Southwest canceled. Then you can see from the chart, it was just a domino effect from there. You know, the restrictions came into place and Live Nation, AEG, the largest concert promoters, started to cancel their events, and everything, into, March was just cancellation. So what are the impacts of that? Well, there's quite a few actually. So one is the impact on the fans and the artists. The artists don't get to play, the fans don't get to go, but the entire ecosystem around live music started to crumble really quickly. So from event promoters like AEG and Live Nation and C3 Presents, to the talent reps, the Paradigms, the UTAs, the William Morris agencies, to ticketing and discovering programs like Ticketmaster or Bands in Town. And, you could see some of the headlines, these are just a few on this slide, but the reason this happened so quickly was the timing couldn't have been worse. If you look at the way these businesses operate, going into the summer season is where they generate most of their revenue. These companies, this ecosystem generates a lot of revenue through the summer tours, the concert series, the festivals, and then, having this happen right at this time really just couldn't have been, worse timing. So the impacts were severe.
Another thing to consider is if you even look at the album release schedule for a lot of these artists, a lot of these, artists, new and established artists, were planning on and still are releasing albums, planning to go on tour, spring, summer, planning to hit the festival circuit. So even if you back up further than just the touring and the festivals, if you look at the release schedule, there was just a ton of new music coming out. So
yeah, it's a great point, because I had those conversations as well with the labels that weren't sure if they're going to release albums. And my initial reaction was, well, Spotify and iTunes are still there, Apple Music is still there. And they, told me, they said so much of the promotion of music today, even the social and digital content that's created, is through live moments. It's these live moments that they use to promote the record, to create the digital content. So it really does, you know, when you take away the live element, it really does affect not just the real world, but the digital world. And to that point, you know, live streaming, before this crisis, live streaming was massive on Twitch. Gaming was a massive passion point for live streaming. And we saw a lot, these are the pre-crisis sort of numbers where we see a lot of engagement on Facebook Live. We see a lot of brands getting great audience, great responses from live streaming, but it never really took off on music. I would say, you know, things like, you know, Smule and TikTok and the sort of sing-along, you know, karaoke type of apps definitely, you know, took off. They weren't, you know, necessarily live. But as far as artists broadcasting, you know, it wasn't that interesting to see, you know, Beyonce play a show in Toronto when the camera was in the back of the venue and you could see the exact same concert, the exact same experience a week later on YouTube. You know, music wasn't using that interactive, participatory elements of live streaming that make it so powerful. So when you look at the platforms that are out there, you've got, like I said, Twitch for gaming. You've got companies like First Two Media that are production and distribution channels. We're going to be talking to Andrew, the CEO of First Two Media, in the next episode of this. But you also see the Instagram, the Vimeos, the stages. There's a lot of platforms out there. But again, I don't think it's the lack of platforms. It's the lack of, you know, music artists really adopting the format and adapting to it and really taking live streaming and not just, you know, broadcasting a concert that I could go see, but these intimate experiences, these interactive moments, these really personable moments. And that's where live streaming really started to find its fans, because you started to see yourself being transported into Chris Martin's living room, you know, around his piano, and you're in this real-time moment with Chris. And you start to get this sense of community because you start to see the interaction happening. You start to see the conversations, but you also get to see the authenticity. You get to see the real, you know, unscripted, unedited, you know, this is just a real moment, which I think, you know, is just something you didn't get to see in prepackaged music video content, or, you know, the behind the scenes that was really, you know, just very well edited to tell the story that it was meant to tell. And then there's this excitement, sort of like anything can happen, you know, and I think that's, these four elements are really what makes live streaming, you know, so powerful. And, you know, now we're starting to see music lean into these things and lean in a big way. And I don't know how else to show the amount of live streams that happen a day, but this is sort of the TV guide of live streaming, if you will, where a few companies are publishing, you know, the daily live streaming events. And this is from a couple of weeks ago, but you can see on any given day, for any given audience, you can see Metallica, you can see Melissa Etheridge, you could see Jazz from Lincoln Center, you could see the Metropolitan Opera, you can see so many live streaming events happening, and there's really no shortage of it. So the artist, you know, not being able to be on tour, not being able to go through the regular promotion cycles, are now gravitating towards live streaming, and it's getting this, you know, a tremendous amount of content put into these pipes. But I have to throw this in here because not every artist is live streaming. And James Blunt, I think, had the best tweet when this started to happen. And I think it just shows you how many artists were live streaming, because he came out and he said, during the lockdown, while many other artists were doing mini concerts from their home, I thought I'd do you all a favor and not. If you don't follow James Blunt on Twitter, you should. He's very self-deprecating, very, very funny. But I think that, you know, it just speaks to the point of how many artists are, you know, available now to their audience through live streams. And what we're seeing out of all this are three high-level trends right now. We're seeing innovative partnerships, we're seeing big moments with big benefit, and we're seeing live stream program. And to sort of break that down a little bit, the innovative partnerships are coming through platforms like Bands in Town, for example, which is a live music discovery ticketing site where 50 million users, 500,000 artists are on the platform. It's massive. But again, once that 2020 unraveled from a live music perspective, we see now they need to pivot. They did a very, very quick pivot. And they partnered with Twitch to do live streaming concerts. And not just you know, the music marathon that kicked it off, but they're doing, you know, very sort of, you know, one-on-one intimate concerts. They're letting artists get access to Twitch's tools to monetize those live streams. You're also seeing artists get a lot of viewers. I mean, you know, I was watching a live stream last night that had 34,000 viewers. And that's, you know, more people you could fit in the Staples Center. And this artist really is a club artist. You know, I'm not going to name who, but it's just a, you know, it's an artist that could not pull 34,000 people into a venue, yet they had 34,000 people watching this live stream. I thought it was fantastic. So the amount of audience you get on, you know, as an emerging artist or a developing artist, not just an established artist, are tremendous. And then the big moments with big benefits, I'm sure you've all seen, there's been a sort of a rush to do, you know, massive events with the, you know, starting, I think, with iHeart and Fox with Elton John's concert. Global Citizen, which is an amazing organization, does their yearly live music concert in New York. And they do some around the world too, I think, right, Kathy?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so they put together One World at Home, which started with a concert that I think Pepsi sponsored. Then they did one with Lady Gaga curating, which Coke sponsored. And these things are getting 20-something million viewers, and they're raising over $100 million for the COVID relief charities, which are amazing, and Amazon Music and Twitch. So you're seeing these big moments with benefits. And the question is, you know, at what point are, you know, our audience is going to shy away? But right now, it's not, it doesn't seem to be a concern because they're still getting, you know, TV-sized audiences through live streaming. And then there's this sort of emergence of live streaming programs, which I'm really excited about, which is, you know, being able to, you know, go on a journey, go on a narrative with an artist, and, you know, not just see this one moment, but see a series of moments. If you're into Miley Cyrus, she does her series every day at 2:30 Eastern. Gibson Guitars has a great one. TikTok has one. Even an artist I work with on an Orange Theory fitness project, an artist named Cruella, two sister DJ groups. They did their first live stream a few weeks ago on Twitch, and they DJ'd live. They fell in love with the format, so now they do constant DJ series, but they also started their own cooking show. So they're doing, you know, cooking with their fans from their kitchen, which I think is amazing. So this idea of live stream becoming, you know, programs is starting to emerge, which I think is great for the format. So that brings us to where we are today. And, you know, I want to talk about with Kathy, what are some of the bright spots that she's seeing and some of the things that are next. So first off, Kathy, thank you again for being here. I'd love if you can give a little background about yourself, and then we can dig into conversation.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Joe. I am Kathy Appelfeld Olson. I'm a longtime, many decades in covering music, media, and entertainment for Billboard, for Synopsis Media, and lately, really the kind of the nexus and the overlap of all of the above, which I think in our conversation about live streaming, that's really what this all is. You know, connecting with music, connecting through video, connecting on digital, and how this is all going to play out. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Very cool. Thank you. So let's start with the popular platforms. Like if I think live streaming and gaming, I instantly go to Twitch. But for music, it's much broader than that. Where are artists and fans gravitating right now for live music?
So it's interesting that you mentioned Twitch, because Twitch has, I think, really, you know, taken great advantage of where we are right now in terms of live streaming, and has grown particularly as a platform connecting with, you know, with a lot of these live streams. SoundCloud, I think just yesterday, earlier this week, you know, launched a new Twitch channel. It's going to be packed with music artist content, music industry content, which is something interesting that's evolving that we can talk about a little bit. So I think that, you know, they've certainly expanded and are embracing this role. FirstTube is doing the same. Of course, there's YouTube, and then still a lot of Facebook Live, a lot of Instagram Live. It's, to me, what I'm seeing is it sort of depends on the artists we're talking about. It depends on the organizations that are coming in to, you know, to kind of back the live streams. It seems like, you know, your Facebook Lives and your Instagram Lives right now tend to be maybe more artist driven, more sort of one-off or a series that artists are doing, whereas a Twitch, for example, is jumping in with, you know, these bigger music artist events. So what about you?
I'm seeing too that brands are, I'm seeing exactly the same thing on the artist side. And on the brand side, I'm actually seeing brands starting to syndicate more, where they're doing live streams across their YouTube, Facebook, and, maybe own channel. So they're trying to, not just look at, the one audience on the platform, but create content that can reach all of them at the same time. So live streaming sort of syndication, which I think is really interesting. And I wonder too, why and I can't get into the head of the Spotify's or the Apple Musics, but you have these amazing music destinations and they didn't make an immediate pivot to live streaming. I know it's not in their roadmap and there's business models and there's, development, issues, but it seems like it would have been, an opportunity for a music platform to own music live streaming.
I think that's a good point. I think we may start to see more of that. One way Spotify has come in, for example, is they're working with artists who are curating playlists, kind of self-isolation playlists. That was kind of an early step for them. I think Selena Gomez was doing some work with Spotify. Coldplay was doing some work with Spotify. But it was interesting that they weren't necessarily the first platform to jump in. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens now as we move into sort of what I see as phase 2 of where we're going with live streaming.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue because the question is, will audiences stay? I mean, is this something that is a, temporary stopgap? I mean, I know we can't predict the future, but is this a temporary stopgap, or is this really what live streaming needed to get in front of audiences for them to realize that there's this whole world of, live moments out there that they could be part of?
Such a good question. And there's a lot of different ways to look at that. I mean, for one, live music, as you talked us through earlier, was one of the first things to shut down. And I think it's going to be one of the last things to open back up again when we think about concert halls and certainly festivals. So first off, to set the stage, I think we're in this period for a while. And even as lockdown starts to open up, it's going to be a staged, stepped effort in a lot of places. So I think there's a lot of room as we're still kind of navigating things. Also interesting to think about, live streaming was not born in quarantine. As you mentioned, like there was some live streaming before. I think artists were using it for fun, for promotional, as you said, it was a lot of, put a camera up at a concert. There's no time like disruption to figure out what was working well, what are the opportunities and where can we get involved. There is certainly an audience now. If you look at some of these numbers, if you look at what's available, as you said, a concert last night with a club artist, attracting 34,000, 200,000, tuned in to that iHeart, that first concert, which seems like decades ago, but was only about a month ago. I think, and there's some data coming out, Synopsis has been putting out, some data. Nielsen Music, put out something that I think it was, 60% of folks think they could use one more streaming service. Moffett-Nathanson just put out a report. This was looking at Hollywood, but I think there are some interesting takeaways for the music industry that this time in our lives is really, potentially going to pivot us to really looking at streaming more, like that we're going to stay there. So I think we're in this period where we will have to stick with live streaming for a while. And afterwards, I think for sure there will be more established patterns, and people are gonna hold on to it.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, like, let's talk about your favorite live streams. I'll give you my 3. Give me your 3. What have been your favorite so far?
So I think number 1 for me, that Post Malone Nirvana set was, I think it blew me and everyone else away, in part because it was just so cool. It was kind of unexpected in some ways, and it was just so well done, bringing in Travis Barker. It was just a beautiful, unique, interesting way to do something different for the fans. It was a cool.
Totally, 100% on my list. And I'm a massive Post Malone fan, but I'm not necessarily a massive Nirvana fan. But like you said, the unexpectedness, it's something that you would never have been able to see had he not been live streaming from his house. And he did it in such a genuine way. I mean, I love the comment where he sort of dawned on him where he's like, oh, this is my first set without auto tune. He's like, people don't realize I'm a crappy singer. Yeah, I'm like, that's just so real, you know?
Yeah, and then not a crappy singer, right?
Yeah, they're not. I know, right? I mean, he
You know.
actually is really good. All right, so that's one. I had that on my list too. What's your set? What's another one?
So another one that I thought was super cool was the way Willie Nelson pivoted the Luck Ranch festival to online. I thought I mean, that's an amazing immersive experience. If you know, for those who are
I
lucky
didn't
enough.
see it. So tell what was that? Like, what did he do?
So he does an annual festival at his ranch outside of Austin, right around South by. Brings in different artists, and I just thought he made a really nice pivot to presenting that online. It felt warm, it felt genuine. You know, all the things that we were saying maybe weren't done so well before are happening now with some of these live streams where, you know, another point about will audiences stay? I mean, when would you ever get a front row seat, right? A front row up at the rail for a lot of these shows. There's an intimacy, even though we're not standing next to each other shoulder to shoulder, there's an intimacy to some of these live streams and live moments that you might otherwise not get. So I think that was a great example of that, you know, intimacy.
It's so true. And I think even I'm thinking about it now from a business perspective, the amount of people I've done these, you know, just we do Zoom conference calls or, you know, FaceTime, you know, chats now, you know, more often than before. And I mean, there's a lot of things that you don't get with the human connection. But again, it's a different experience. It's just another, you know, it's an augment to what it is. And all right, so you got one more. What's your third on the list?
So third, and you mentioned it already, I think just as something different and a really cool pivot, I think Miley Cyrus's Bright Minded has been brilliant. Really brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she's certainly out there, you know, she was on Saturday Night Live, you know, one of their you know, virtual shows performing, but what a cool way to use your platform to have conversations with people. We're finding artists doing, you know, cooking shows, doing different things, but she was very early and very organized, and I really enjoyed those conversations. I thought that's an interesting model. I remember the first couple I watched, I thought, I wonder how many artists we might see doing something like this, you know, using their platform, expanding audiences, having conversations that are important.
So I had that on my list too. I think I just
Great minds.
yeah, I guess so. But no, I think that, you know, the thing that like struck me is again, like, you know, using live streaming not just as this one moment, not just this one way means to put content out, but to build the programming and to build this sort of narrative and this dynamic. Because what I instantly saw, you know, looking at it through the lens of marketing, is this is an amazing opportunity for a brand, because it isn't just the one moment, and not that there's anything wrong with one moments, but it is something that you can be a part of and you can invest in and you can use to introduce your consumers to. You can use to, you know, obviously, you know, be integrated and do media within the show, but it took on something much bigger that eventually is going to have another life once we're able to go back into the real world.
Right.
You know?
And that's a nice tie to our brands looking at live streaming, which I know, you know, is one of your questions.
Yeah. But we got to get wait. We got to get to I didn't do my third yet. So yeah. So you had Willie Nelson, but I actually did the Chris Martin one, and I know it sounds obvious, but it was just like that was like the moment for me when it all just kind of clicked. When like, all right, this is, you know, something that is going to, you know, really change the way we interact with artists, and just seeing Chris behind his piano. And, you know, I mean, I'm a massive Coldplay fan. I mean, you know, I'm also a massive Radiohead fan. Like, so I run the gamut, but just seeing him, you know, there, it's just like that to me, again, it's that intimacy, it's the up closeness. Like I've never sat beside Chris Martin at his piano, you know, and here I am able to do it. Sorry. So that was my third. Anyway, so now let's go into the music and brands. So how are brands looking at music and live streaming?
So I think so far they're doing a lot of looking, and there hasn't really been much action. So my short answer to, you know, are brands doing anything yet is no, but I think for a really good reason, right? I mean, they're going to be you know, different segments and different phases of this whole you know, kind of lockdown phase and where we are with music live streaming. So up until now, I think the only, you know, brand for lack of a better way to put it, that's been really strongly connected with a lot of these live streams has been coronavirus, right? And highlighting the frontline workers and highlighting organizations that are really there to help. Hasn't been a place necessarily for a brand to have a strong, a strong connection there, I think for a good reason. But now, this conversation is coming at an interesting time. I think we're hitting our first inflection point in this whole, situation where we're starting to think about, where's the business model here? I mean, this has all been so tremendous. And I think the social good and the charitable aspect of this, which is, something that we can talk about, is certainly going to continue and is important. And there's also a business, now there's also some conversations that are starting to happen around how can brands get involved? Where is the business? What's the best way to do this? So I think we're about to start seeing more of those conversations and more of those activations.
I think that's a great point. I think you're right. I mean, we have been still in emergency crisis mode as people and as businesses. And, while, you see a lot of the charitable, elements woven into a lot of these live streams. I saw Norwell Health, the hospital system in New York last night, live streamed a DJ set with Questlove, for their workers, which I thought was amazing. And then today, St. Jude's is doing a live stream, which sort of, so you've got these, that's still that sort of, like you said, that charitable social good piece, which I hope never goes away. I think it's fantastic, and it's raising a ton of awareness and ton of, money for the relief efforts. But I think you're right. I mean, it sounds like there is an inflection point, and I think brands are going to look at it a little differently, especially now that it's almost, proven itself, it's found its footing. Like I can see now as a brand where I could play a role in some of these, in this live streaming world.
Right. So the question now is, where are the opportunities? How can a brand come in, connect, right? There's some way to monetize the situation, but still feel authentic. I certainly agree. I hope this social good piece, is something that will continue forever. That's been a wonderful, silver lining here. And I think, again, those conversations are starting to happen. Later this week, I know there's a conference, the AMP Music Conference. It's a virtual gathering of music industry professionals, from promotion to, promotion, events, management, label, I think some talent involved, to really start talking about exactly this. Where are we going from here? And again, there's a great opportunity in times of disruption to figure out things that can be done better that maybe brands weren't doing before in connecting with live music, and new opportunities. There's nothing more evocative and emotional than music. So here we are at this time where, where the whole world, right, on a human level, are connecting with music. We're sitting in our own living rooms and crying and laughing and whatever vibe is, and remembering, and all of those, sort of sensory things are happening. So where can a brand, get involved? How can a brand, support a piece of that, own a piece of that, work with that, again, in a way that's really authentic, and can carry through and can really help support some of these, artists, some of these programs, where are the opportunities there?
And you're talking about a new fan experience, which I think is amazing, because I think that's the most meaningful role for brands, is when they can, contribute to the fan experience. How do you, either bring access or elevate it or enhance it in some way? And now what you're describing, what live streaming is given, is an entirely new fan experience. It's an entirely new way for brands to look at the way they can create moments with their customers. And I think, whether it's, being part of the live stream, there's always the media and integration pieces, but I think the fan experience side is going to continue to grow. And, even more so when we get, into the real world, but even in the interactive world, one of the things I'm missing on live streaming really is the participation that you get, real time through live streaming, which is that sort of conversational piece. And I think you see it a lot in gaming and Twitch, and there's more, more sort of interactive between the viewer and the broadcaster. And I think that's, an opportunity for brands. I think, to own the conversation and the social chatter around a live stream is a really interesting space. So we're going to see things like that, I hope. So I think you're right. I think there's still, a lot to be, looked at. But if you want to sort of like, cap it off with, any other sort of like evolution of live streaming, like, what do you see, I mean, I know it's hard to predict because we're all sort of living this real time, but what are the things you're seeing that give you sort of a glimmer into what's, what's next?
I mean, I think there's a lot of opportunity here. There's been so much live streaming that we're able to see very quickly what's working, what's not working. Where might we go from here? We mentioned Bright Minded. I think I could see programs and those types of live streams, kind of continuing on, perhaps into other platforms. I think it's interesting to look at going back to the artists who are releasing music, and just the idea of discoverability, right? We have big events, we have artists who are more known, then we have artists who are kind of up and coming, or perhaps doing something new. I interviewed, you mentioned Radiohead, Ed O'Brien of Radiohead recently. He's just come out with his first solo album, his first EOB album. And I interviewed him a few weeks ago. What a weird time to be releasing your first solo album. So what happens with that, right? Where does that go? He's been trying to, he's been guesting virtually on a bunch of things. And then he just started his own weekly live stream on his Instagram, talking to creators and artists who he thinks are interesting. So are we going to see more of that? And how does that, again, sustain an artist? Where how are the artists connecting with fans, and how are businesses maybe able to, to get a piece of that? Are we going to see whole new shows? Is this the beginning of the next Unplugged? Is this the beginning of the next, living room series that continues on? I mean, one of the cool things, let's face it, especially with these virtual collaborations, it's so cool to see these artists at home, to see them using the tools they have. And it's cool to see, like, wow, they're just singing. They're just standing in their living room singing. Like, listen to that voice, listen to those instruments. It's funny, going back to the Together at Home concert. I loved what they did with the 2-hour live evening performance, but I loved watching it during the day. Watching it during the day with some. There were some artists, global artists that I wasn't aware of before. There was some. It was just such an interesting platform for discoverability, where I think, I might never buy a ticket to see a live show for some of these artists that I didn't know that well. What a great way to introduce them, right? What a great way to bring out new artists.
I think that's a huge point, the discoverability. So on that note, we're gonna wrap it up. We have so much more to talk about with live streaming. We're gonna do a live Instagram Q&A. So if you have questions and things you want to bring to the table, please join us. That'll be great. Kathy will be there. And tune in for the next part of this series, which is going to be with Andrew Birnbaum, who's the CEO, founder of First Two Media. And we're really going to talk about how brands can create live streaming programs, the principles behind that, and some of the approaches. So thank you again, Kathy, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me.